For 5 years, the Alpha King had rejected every woman in the kingdom. Noble daughters arrived in silks and jewels. Princesses crossed oceans to stand before him. Warriors, scholars, beauties beyond measure. All of them knelt at his feet, and all of them left with nothing but the cold echo of his refusal. The court whispered that he was cursed, that his heart had turned to stone, that perhaps the bloodline of Valdoria would end with him, and the kingdom would crumble into chaos. They weren't entirely wrong. What no one knew, what Kale guarded more fiercely than his throne, was the truth that lived in his veins. The ancient darkness coiled around his heart, waiting, hungry, ready to consume him the moment he dared to love. So he rejected them all, every single one, until the day his best friend's sister walked into the great hall. Seren wasn't supposed to be there. She'd been hidden away for years, disgraced and forgotten, carrying a secret so terrible that her own family had erased her from memory. She expected nothing from this day except more humiliation. But when the Alpha King's gaze found hers across the crowded hall, something shifted. He didn't look away, and when he spoke, his voice carried like thunder through the stunned silence. Her. I choose her. He would marry her, protect her, give her everything she could ever need. But only under one condition: he would never love her. Neither of them understood how impossible that vow would become. The Great Hall of Valdoria had witnessed coronations, treaties, and declarations of war. But tonight, it held something far more desperate. Another selection ceremony. 300 women stood arranged in perfect rows across the marble floor. Daughters of lords and generals, merchant princes and foreign dignitaries. Every one of them dressed in their finest, perfumed and polished and desperate to be chosen. 5 years of this. 5 years of ceremonies and rejections, of hopes raised and crushed, of the kingdom's most powerful families offering their daughters like sacrifices to a god who refused to be appeased. And still, the throne remained without a queen. High Counselor Brennick stood near the dais, his weathered face tight with barely concealed frustration. The kingdom needed an heir. The noble houses were growing restless. Alliances were fraying at the edges, and whispers of rebellion had begun to slither through the eastern provinces. The Alpha King needed a mate, but the Alpha King, it seemed, needed nothing at all. Kale sat upon the obsidian throne as if it were a prison rather than a seat of power. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, pale as winter frost, unsettling in their intensity, swept across the assembled women with the same cold disinterest he'd shown at every ceremony before this one. He was beautiful. Even his enemies admitted that. The kind of beauty that belonged to winter storms and sharp blades. Dangerous, merciless, impossible to look away from. But there was something else beneath the surface, something the court couldn't name. A coldness that went deeper than temperament. Standing to the left of the throne, arms crossed over his broad chest, was Jorek Thane, the king's shield. Kale's closest friend since childhood, and the only person in the kingdom who could speak to him without formal address. Tonight, Jorek looked like he'd swallowed broken glass. You could at least pretend to consider them, Jorek muttered, low enough that only Kale could hear. I am considering them. Kale's voice was flat. I'm considering how quickly I can end this. The council is losing patience. The council can choke on their patience. Jorek exhaled slowly. He'd known Kale for 23 years, had fought beside him in 3 wars, had watched him transform from a reckless prince into this cold, untouchable king. And still, after all this time, he couldn't understand what had changed. Something had broken inside Kale 5 years ago. Something he refused to speak about. The ceremony droned on. The Master of Rites announced each woman's name and lineage with practiced formality. One by one they approached the throne. One by one, Kale dismissed them with a word or a gesture, or sometimes simply a look that sent them retreating with tears streaming down their faces. Jorik watched a duke's daughter stumble away, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs, and felt his jaw clench. "This is cruelty," he said. "This is mercy," Kale replied. "They wouldn't want what I have to offer." Before Yorick could respond, the great doors at the far end of the hall burst open. Every head turned. A woman stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the torchlight of the corridor beyond. She wasn't dressed like the others. No silk gown or jeweled adornments. She wore a simple traveling cloak, dusty from the road, and her dark hair was windswept and wild. But it was her face that made the hall go silent. Jorik's blood turned to ice. "No," he breathed. "That's impossible." The woman walked forward, her chin lifted despite the obvious terror in her eyes. She moved like someone who expected to be struck down at any moment, but had decided to keep walking anyway. Guards moved to intercept her, but a sharp gesture from the throne stopped them mid-step. Kale had risen. For the first time in 5 years, the Alpha King had risen from his throne during a selection ceremony. "Who is that?" Brennick demanded, his voice cutting through the silence. "She's not on the registry. She has no right to—" "She has every right." The words came from Kale, soft as snowfall and twice as cold. His gaze hadn't left the woman since she'd appeared. Jorik stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively to the sword at his hip. "Kale, listen to me. That's my— I know who she is." The woman had stopped at the base of the dais. Up close, the resemblance to Jorik was unmistakable. The same sharp cheekbones, the same dark eyes, the same stubborn set of the jaw. But where Jorik was all controlled strength, she was something else entirely. Something wounded and fierce and utterly, impossibly alive. "Seren Thane," Kale said her name like he was tasting it. "I was told you were dead." "Many people were told that, Your Majesty." Her voice didn't waver. Most of them were disappointed to learn otherwise. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jorik looked like he might be sick. Kale descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing in the cavernous silence. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, cutting through the tension like a blade through silk, cold and final and absolutely certain, the Alpha King announced, "Her. I choose her." The hall erupted into chaos. The private study was smaller than Seren expected. She'd been escorted here by guards who looked at her like she might burst into flames at any moment. They'd positioned themselves outside the heavy wooden door with expressions that suggested they were protecting the king from her, not the other way around. Which was almost funny, considering everything. Almost. Seren stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to hide their trembling. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with books and scrolls and maps of territories she'd only ever read about. A fire crackled in the hearth despite the warmth of the summer evening, casting dancing shadows across the stone floor. And by the window, his back to her, stood the Alpha King. He hadn't spoken since dismissing the guards. Just stood there, perfectly still, staring out at the moonlit gardens as if she didn't exist. Seren used the silence to study him. He was taller than she remembered. The last time she'd seen him, she'd been 16, and he'd been a prince who laughed easily and fought recklessly and looked at the world like it owed him nothing, and he intended to take everything anyway. That prince was gone. The man who'd replaced him was carved from sharper edges. Colder. There was something almost painful about looking at him directly, like staring at the sun during an eclipse, beautiful and wrong and somehow dangerous. "You were supposed to stay hidden." His voice broke the silence without warning. He still hadn't turned around. Seren swallowed. "I didn't have a choice. My father— I know what your father did." Now he turned, and the full weight of that frozen stare landed on her. He tried to sell you to a merchant caravan heading for the Eastern Territories, claimed you were a servant with no family to claim her. Heat flooded Seren's cheeks, shame and rage in equal measure. How did you? I'm the king. I know everything that happens in my kingdom. He moved away from the window, approaching her with slow, measured steps, including the fact that Aldrich Thane has been trying to dispose of his eldest daughter for 3 years. Seren's heart hammered against her ribs. Of course he knew. Of course nothing in this kingdom escaped his attention. She'd been a fool to think she could remain invisible forever. Why didn't you stop him? The question escaped before she could bite it back. Kyle stopped walking. Something flickered across his face, too fast to identify, before the mask of cold indifference returned. Because until tonight, your existence served no purpose to me. He said it without cruelty, without malice, just fact. Now it does. Seren felt the words like a slap. And what purpose is that, Your Majesty? You're going to be my queen. She almost laughed. Almost. But the complete absence of humor in his expression stopped her. You can't be serious. I'm always serious. It's one of my more tedious qualities. You rejected 300 women tonight. Princesses. Daughters of the most powerful families in the realm. She shook her head slowly. And you chose me? The disgraced daughter that even her own family wanted to sell into slavery? Yes. Why? He was close now. Close enough that she could see the individual threads of gray in his pale gaze, the faint scar that traced along his jaw, the way his breath didn't fog in the cool air even though hers did. He was cold. Not metaphorically. Actually, physically cold. She could feel it radiating off him like winter itself lived beneath his skin. Because you're Yorick's sister, Kale said quietly. Because I've known of your existence since we were children. Because you are the one woman in this kingdom that I could never... He paused, and for just a moment, something cracked in his composure. That I would never be tempted to love. The words should have hurt. Instead, they confused her. I don't understand, Seren admitted. You don't need to understand. You need to accept. He stepped back, and the strange moment of vulnerability vanished as quickly as it had appeared. I'm offering you marriage, protection, a crown and a title and more wealth than your father ever dreamed of. You'll be queen of the most powerful kingdom on the continent. In exchange for what? An heir. Perhaps two, to secure the succession. His voice was clinical now, detached. Beyond that, we will share nothing. No dinners, no conversation, no pretense of affection. You will have your own chambers, your own servants, your own life entirely separate from mine. Seren stared at him. That's not a marriage. That's a business arrangement. Yes, he agreed. It is. And you expect me to simply accept this? I expect you to recognize that your alternatives are significantly worse. Something cold entered his tone. Your father will not stop trying to destroy you, Seren. Whatever happened 3 years ago, whatever he blames you for, he will never forgive. If you refuse my offer, you'll be back on the road by morning. And next time, there won't be anyone to intercept the caravan. Her blood turned to ice. He knew about that too. Knew that she'd been drugged and loaded onto a wagon like cargo. Knew that she'd woken up 50 miles from home with chains on her wrists and a gag in her mouth. Knew that someone had freed her before the caravan crossed the border. That was you, she breathed. You're the one who sent the soldiers. Kyle said nothing, which was answer enough. Why? She demanded. If I served no purpose to you, why bother saving me at all? For a long moment, he simply looked at her, then, quietly. Because Jorik would never have forgiven me if I let you disappear. Something tightened in Seren's chest. Her brother. Her brother who'd been forced to watch her be declared dead and disgraced. Her brother who'd believed, like everyone else, that she'd died in that fire. "Does he know," she asked, "that I'm alive? That I've been alive this whole time?" "He does now." She closed her eyes. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of surviving in the shadows, always running, always looking over her shoulder. And now, in the span of a single night, everything had changed. The Alpha King was offering her safety, a throne, a life. All she had to give up was any hope of being loved. She opened her eyes and met his gaze directly. "I accept your terms, Your Majesty." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or something darker. "You should think carefully before—" "I've thought about it for 3 years," she interrupted. "Every night spent sleeping in barns and abandoned houses. Every morning waking up afraid. I've thought about what I would give for safety, for peace, for one single day where I didn't have to run." She lifted her chin. "You're offering me all of that. I don't care about love. I don't care about affection. I care about surviving." Kale studied her for a long, unreadable moment. Then he nodded once. "The wedding will take place in 3 days. My steward will see to the arrangements." He turned toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "One more thing." "Yes?" He didn't look at her. "I will never love you," he said quietly. "Please understand that. No matter what happens, no matter how long we're bound together, I cannot love you. It's not cruelty. It's not coldness. It's simply impossible." And then he was gone, leaving Seren alone with the crackling fire and the impossible weight of everything he hadn't said. The council chamber blazed with morning light. Seren had slept perhaps an hour, fitful, restless, and plagued by dreams she couldn't remember, but woke from with tears on her cheeks. The blind servants who'd arrived at her chambers had bathed her, dressed her in borrowed silks, and led her through endless corridors to this moment, this room, these people. A long table dominated the space, surrounded by stern-faced advisors in formal robes. The Alpha King sat at the head, his expression revealing nothing. To his right, Jorik stood rigid as a statue, his jaw clenched so tightly Seren could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. And at the far end of the table, barely looking at her, sat her father. Aldrich Thane had aged in 3 years. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and deep lines carved his face like wounds. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were exactly as she remembered them. He looked at her the way one might look at a stain on an otherwise pristine floor. "Please sit." Kale gestured to a chair near him. Seren sat, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. High Counselor Brennick cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, the marriage contract has been prepared according to your specifications. If you'd like me to summarize the terms—" "That won't be necessary." Kale picked up the document, scanned it briefly, and then set it down. "The terms are straightforward." He looked at Seren, or rather, at some point slightly to the left of her face. "You will be my queen. You will have access to the royal treasury, your own household, your own guard. In return, you will provide the kingdom with heirs and fulfill whatever ceremonial duties your station requires." "And what of my daughter's history?" Aldrich's voice sliced through the room like a blade. "Does His Majesty truly intend to place a murderer on the throne of Valdoria?" The word hung in the air, poisonous and heavy. Seren's hands clenched beneath the table. She didn't look at her father. Couldn't look at him without remembering the way he'd dragged her from her bed that night, the accusations he'd screamed, the hatred in his voice when he'd pronounced her dead to him. "I was speaking to my future queen," Kale said calmly. "Not to you." Aldrich's face flushed. "Your Majesty, with respect." "You have no respect." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. You have contempt for your daughter, resentment for your son's position, and ambition that far exceeds your capabilities. What you do not have is permission to speak in this chamber. Silence crashed over the table. Jorik's eyes darted to Kale, surprise breaking through his careful composure. Brennick and the other counselors exchanged uneasy glances, and Seren. Seren felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. No one had ever defended her, not once in her entire life. My future queen, Kale continued, turning back to her. Is there anything in these terms you find objectionable? Seren forced herself to breathe. No, Your Majesty. The terms are more than generous. Generous, Kale repeated, and for just a moment that strange confusion flickered across his features again. You find it generous to be married to a man who wants nothing to do with you. I find it generous to be given safety, Seren replied steadily. To be given a place where my own father cannot sell me like livestock. To be given. Her voice caught slightly. Any future at all. The confession had cost her something. She could feel the rawness of it in her throat, the vulnerability of admitting how little she'd had to hope for. Aldrich made a sound of disgust. Yorick's expression twisted with pain. But Kale looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Very well, he said quietly. Sign here. Seren signed. Her hand was steady now, the trembling gone. Whatever fear remained had been burned away by something fiercer, determination. Aldrich signed as witness, his pen scratching across the parchment with barely suppressed fury. The counselors added their signatures. And then it was done. She was going to be queen. The meeting dispersed slowly. Counselors filed out, whispering among themselves. Aldrich left without looking at her, his footsteps sharp against the stone floor. Seren was almost to the door when a hand closed around her arm. She spun, heart hammering, and found herself face to face with her brother. Jorik's eyes were red-rimmed. His grip was gentle despite its urgency. I thought you were dead, he whispered. For 3 years, I thought. I know. Her voice broke. Jorik, I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, but Father... I know what Father did. Something dark crossed his face. I know everything now. They stood in silence for a moment, years of separation and grief pressing between them. Why did you come back? Jorik asked finally. You could have stayed hidden. You could have been safe. Seren shook her head slowly. I was never safe. I was just running. And I couldn't run anymore. So you came here? To him? There was something in his voice, a warning perhaps, or a question he couldn't quite bring himself to ask. You're his closest friend, Seren said carefully. Do you think he'll hurt me? Jorik's jaw tightened. Kale has never raised a hand to anyone who didn't deserve it. That's not what I asked. Her brother looked away. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. He's not the boy you remember, Seren. Something happened to him 5 years ago. Something that changed him. He won't talk about it. Won't let anyone close. Won't... He stopped, shaking his head. Just be careful. Please. Whatever he's offering, there's a reason behind it. And I don't think it's a reason either of us understands. Before Seren could respond, another voice cut through the corridor. How touching. They both turned. A woman stood in the shadow of a doorway, watching them with a cold smile. She was beautiful. Dark hair, sharp features, a gown of deep burgundy that clung to her figure. Everything about her screamed nobility and cruelty in equal measure. Lady Meera, Jorik said stiffly, I didn't realize you were still at court. Where else would I be? The woman, Meera, stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Seren with unsettling intensity. Especially now that our dear king has finally chosen a bride. And such an interesting choice. Seren felt her spine stiffen. I don't believe we've met. No, you wouldn't remember me. You were just a child when your family sent you away in disgrace. Meera's smile widened. But I remember you. I remember the fire. I remember the screaming. I remember the body they pulled from the ashes. That's enough, Jorek growled. Is it? Meera tilted her head, her gaze never leaving Seren's face. Does His Majesty know, I wonder? Does he know what his new bride did to Lord Vasil's son? How she burned him alive while he begged for mercy? Serene's blood turned to ice. I didn't... She started. Save your denials for someone who believes them. Meera stepped closer, close enough that Seren could smell her perfume, jasmine and something darker beneath. The king thinks he's chosen a meek little victim, someone too broken to be a threat. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But I know what you are. And when he discovers the truth, when he sees the monster beneath that pretty face, he'll destroy you. She swept past them without another word, her heels clicking against the stone. Seren stood frozen, her heart pounding, her father's accusations echoing in her mind alongside Meera's poisonous words. Murderer. Monster. Seren. Jorek's hand found her shoulder. Whatever she said, it's true. The words came out hollow. Everything she said. It's all true. No. Her brother's voice was fierce. I don't believe that. I've never believed it. You should. Seren pulled away from his grip, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. Because when the king finds out, and he will find out, he won't just destroy me, Jorek. He'll destroy everything I touch. She walked away before he could respond. But his words followed her down the corridor, haunting her long after she'd reached the solitude of her chambers. Something happened to him 5 years ago. Something that changed him. What had happened to the Alpha King? And what would happen to her when he discovered what she'd done? The night before her wedding, Seren couldn't sleep. She wandered the castle corridors like a ghost, her borrowed silk robe whispering against the cold stone floors. The guards stationed at various posts acknowledged her with stiff nods, but made no move to stop her. She was their future queen, after all. The thought still felt absurd. She found herself in the east wing, drawn by the faint glow of candlelight spilling from beneath a heavy oak door. The library. She discovered it on her second day at the castle. A vast cavern of books and scrolls that stretched 3 stories high, with ladders on brass rails and reading alcoves tucked into every corner. It had become her refuge. Seren pushed the door open, expecting solitude, and froze. Jorek sat in one of the leather chairs by the fireplace, a half-empty bottle of wine in his hand. He looked up at her entrance, and even in the dim light, she could see the exhaustion carved into his features. Can't sleep either? He asked. No? She hesitated at the threshold. I can leave if you... Stay. He gestured to the chair across from him. Please. Seren crossed the room and settled into the chair, pulling her legs up beneath her like she used to do as a child. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Do you remember? Jorek said finally, when we used to sneak out to the old mill at night? You'd bring those terrible meat pies you'd stolen from the kitchen, and I'd pretend they weren't the worst thing I'd ever tasted. Despite everything, Seren smiled. They weren't that bad. They were inedible. Cook used to put fish oil in the crust. He shook his head, a ghost of a smile crossing his lips. But you were so proud of yourself for stealing them that I couldn't bear to tell you. The memory ached. A different time, a different life. I missed you, she admitted quietly. Every day for 3 years. I wanted to write to you, to tell you I was alive, but I knew Father would intercept any letter, and if he found out where I was, he would have finished what he started. Jorek's voice hardened. I know. I've pieced together most of it by now. Most of it. He set the wine bottle down and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I know you were at the Vasil estate the night of the fire. I know their son Calder died in the flames. And I know Father blamed you. Claimed you used some kind of unnatural power to kill him. Serene's throat tightened. Jorik, what I don't know, he continued, is what actually happened. Because the sister I grew up with, the girl who used to cry when the kitchen cats caught mice, she's not capable of murder. Her vision blurred with unshed tears. You don't know what I'm capable of. Then tell me. She wanted to. Gods, she wanted to. But the memories were a tangled knot of terror and confusion and guilt that she'd never been able to unravel. I don't remember, she whispered. That's the truth. I remember being at the estate. I remember Calder cornering me in the garden, saying things, wanting things I didn't want to give. I remember being afraid. She shook her head slowly, and then there was fire. Everywhere. So hot I thought my skin would melt, and Calder was screaming, and I was running, and then... Her voice broke. Then nothing. I woke up in the forest 2 miles away with burns on my hands and his blood on my dress, and Father was there, telling me what I'd done, what I was. Jorik was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was fierce. You didn't kill him. You don't know that. I know you. He reached across the space between them and gripped her hand. Whatever happened that night, whatever power you might have, you're not a murderer, Seren. I'd stake my life on it. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately that it hurt. There's something else, Jorik said, his tone shifting. Something you need to understand before tomorrow. Seren wiped her eyes. About the wedding? About Kale. He released her hand and sat back. 5 years ago, something happened to him. Something that changed everything. You mentioned that before. What was it? Jorik's jaw tightened. He was engaged. To a woman named Lyanna. She was good for him. Made him laugh. Made him reckless in the best ways. They were going to be married the summer after his coronation. A chill crept down Seren's spine. What happened to her? She died. The words came out flat, hollow. 3 days before the wedding. Some kind of wasting sickness that came on suddenly and took her within hours. That's terrible. It was. Jorik's eyes met hers, and something dark lurked in their depths. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what happened to Kale when she died. What do you mean? I mean he changed. Not just emotionally, physically. He used to run hot, the way all strong alphas do. But after Lyanna's death, he became cold. Like winter had taken root inside him. Jorik shook his head. The healers couldn't explain it. Neither could the scholars or the mages. It's like something fundamental shifted in his very nature. Seren remembered the chill that had radiated from Kale's skin, the way his breath didn't fog in cool air. You think her death cursed him somehow? I think something happened that night that none of us understand. Jorik's voice dropped. And I think that's why he's refused to marry for 5 years. Why he's rejected every woman who stood before him. Because he's afraid of loving someone again? Because he's afraid of what happens if he does. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the castle, a clock chimed midnight. Why are you telling me this? Seren asked. Jorik was quiet for a long moment. Then, because despite what he says, despite how cold he seems, I've seen the way he looks at you. It's different than how he looked at the others. He met her gaze directly. And that terrifies me, Seren, because if he starts to feel something for you, and if that feeling triggers whatever darkness is living inside him. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Get some sleep, Jorik said, rising from his chair. Tomorrow changes everything. He left her alone in the library, surrounded by books and shadows and the terrible weight of everything she didn't understand. The Cathedral of Valdoria had stood for 700 years. Its spires pierced the clouds like stone fingers reaching for heaven, and its stained glass windows cast fractured rainbows across the marble floor. Today, every pew was filled. Noble families in their finest silks, foreign dignitaries in formal regalia, common folk who'd been granted entry to witness history. The Alpha King was finally taking a bride. Seren stood at the entrance, her pulse thundering in her ears. The wedding gown was heavier than anything she'd ever worn. Layers of white silk and silver embroidery, a train that stretched 10 feet behind her. A veil obscured her features, thin enough to see through but thick enough to blur her face into something ethereal and unknowable. She'd requested the veil herself, not to hide her beauty or lack thereof, but to hide her fear. To hide the tears that kept threatening to fall. To hide the face of a woman who'd been accused of murder walking into a cathedral full of people who might remember. Ready? The voice belonged to Brennick, who'd been assigned to escort her down the aisle in lieu of her father. Aldrich Thane had refused to participate. Ready, Seren lied. The doors swung open and 1,000 faces turned to stare. The walk seemed to stretch forever. Each step felt weighted with judgment, with curiosity, with barely concealed whispers that followed in her wake. Is that really Jorik's sister? I thought she died. They say she burned a man alive. What was the king thinking? She's nobody. Seren kept her eyes fixed forward, on the altar where Kale waited. He wore black, as she'd known he would. Formal clothing that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, the sharp lines of his jaw. A crown of silver sat upon his dark hair, simple but unmistakable in its authority. He was watching her approach with those eyes like frozen starlight, and for once, his expression wasn't entirely cold. There was something else there, something that looked almost like wonder. The ceremony began. The high priest's voice echoed through the vast space, speaking words that had been spoken for centuries. Sacred vows, binding oaths, the eternal promises that would chain her to this man until death parted them. Seren barely heard any of it. She was too aware of Kale standing beside her, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his body. Too aware of the weight of her veil, the whispers of the crowd, the way Lady Meera was staring at her from the front pew with barely concealed malice. The marks of binding, the high priest announced, let the king present his mark to his bride. This was the moment. In Valdorian tradition, the bride's face was revealed during the exchange of marks, sacred symbols painted on the forehead with consecrated oil. The crowd would finally see her clearly. Every scar, every flaw, every hint of the fire that had destroyed her life. Kyle stepped closer. His hands rose to the edge of her veil. Serene's breath caught. Her heart raced so fast she thought she might faint. This is it, she thought. He'll see me. Everyone will see me. And they'll know. But Kale didn't lift the veil. Instead, he leaned closer, close enough that his lips nearly brushed the fabric over her ear, and whispered, "Do you want them to see you?" Seren blinked. What? The veil. His voice was barely audible. Do you want me to remove it? She didn't understand. The ceremony required it. Tradition demanded it. Every queen in Valdorian history had been unveiled at this moment. No, she admitted. I don't. Then they won't. He pulled back, and in a voice that carried through the entire cathedral announced, "The Queen of Valdoria will receive her mark beneath the veil, as is her right and her choice. Any who object may take their objections to me directly." Stunned silence fell over the crowd. The high priest sputtered, "Your Majesty, the tradition clearly states—" "Tradition serves the crown." Kale's voice was ice. "Not the other way around. Continue." Seren stood frozen, her heart pounding, as Kale lifted the edge of her veil just enough to expose her forehead. His fingers were cold as they traced the sacred mark onto her skin, gentle, precise, unexpectedly careful. No one else could see. He'd shielded her with his own body, his back to the crowd, giving her this small, impossible privacy in front of 1,000 watching eyes. "My mark upon you," he murmured, completing the symbol. "Now yours upon me." With trembling hands, Seren dipped her finger in the consecrated oil and reached up to his forehead. He was tall. She had to rise on her toes to reach. And up close, she could see everything the distance had hidden. The dark circles beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his pulse jumped in his throat despite his perfect composure. He was afraid too, she realized, afraid of something she couldn't name. She traced the mark onto his skin, and he shivered at her touch, not from cold, but from something else entirely. "My mark upon you," she whispered. The high priest continued the ceremony, but Seren barely heard the words. She was still reeling from what had just happened, what Kale had done for her. He'd protected her. Publicly, deliberately, without hesitation. "By the power vested in me by the gods and the kingdom of Valdoria," the high priest intoned, "I pronounce you bonded, alpha and queen, husband and wife." The crowd erupted in applause. Confused, uncertain, but applause nonetheless. "You may reveal your bride to the kingdom, your majesty." Another moment of truth. Kale turned to face her, his winter storm gaze searching her veiled face. "I won't force you," he said quietly. "Ever. But if you're willing, just this once, I think it would help." Seren understood what he wasn't saying. The court needed to see their queen, needed to accept her. If she remained hidden forever, the whispers would only grow louder. She nodded once. Kyle's hands rose to the edge of her veil. Slowly, carefully, he lifted it back from her face, revealing her to the light. 1,000 gasps echoed through the cathedral. Seren knew what they were seeing. Dark hair tumbling past her shoulders, sharp features softened by youth. And there, just visible above her left eyebrow, a faint, silvery scar. The only remaining mark from the fire that had destroyed her old life. She lifted her chin and met their stares without flinching. "This is who I am," the gesture said. "This is your queen. Accept it or don't." Kale's hand found hers. His grip was cold but steady. "My queen," he said, loud enough for all to hear. Then, softer, for her alone. "Well done." The crowds roared their approval. But as Kale led her down the aisle toward their new life together, Seren caught Lady Meera's gaze in the crowd. The woman wasn't applauding. She was smiling, a cold, knowing smile that promised this was far from over. The royal chambers were larger than the entire cottage Seren had spent the last year hiding in. A massive bed dominated the space, draped in silk the color of midnight. Candles flickered on every surface, casting the room in warm, golden light. Through the tall windows, the moon hung full and heavy over the castle grounds. Seren sat on the edge of the bed, her wedding gown exchanged for a nightgown of thin white cotton, her hands twisted in her lap. This was happening. This was actually happening. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she managed. Kale entered and closed the door behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence. He'd changed from his formal wedding clothes into simpler attire, dark trousers, a white shirt unlaced at the throat. His crown was gone. Without it, he looked younger somehow. More human. Still impossibly beautiful. Still radiating that strange, unnatural cold. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, remaining near the door. "I won't touch you without your permission." Seren released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "The contract said—" "I know what the contract said." He moved to the window, keeping his back to her. "An heir. Perhaps two. I remember the terms." A pause. But I won't force myself on you, Seren. Not tonight. Not ever. Something in his voice made her chest tighten. Not coldness this time, but something else. Something that sounded almost like shame. Then why are you here? She asked. Because the court will expect evidence of consummation. His voice was clinical, detached. Stained sheets, the scent of union on our skin. Without it, they'll question the legitimacy of any children we might eventually have. So we fake it, if you're willing. She should have felt relieved. She did feel relieved. And yet, something else stirred beneath the surface. Something that felt dangerously close to disappointment. Stop it, she told herself firmly. This is exactly what you wanted. Safety without strings, protection without pain. How do we... She trailed off, embarrassed. Kyle turned from the window. Even across the room she could feel the cold emanating from him, that unnatural winter that lived beneath his skin. The scent is simple enough. We need only be close. He approached the bed slowly, giving her time to pull away. May I sit? Seren nodded. He settled onto the mattress beside her, close enough that she could see the pale depths of his unsettling stare. Up close, the cold was more intense, like standing near an open window in deep winter. You're freezing, she breathed. I'm always freezing. He said it without self-pity, just fact. I've grown accustomed to it. Is that why the castle is so warm? All the fires, even in summer? A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. The staff learned quickly. The first winter after my change, I nearly froze 3 servants who touched me without warning. Froze them? The cold transfers. His jaw tightened. If I touch someone for too long, without control, their temperature drops. Their blood slows. In extreme cases. He didn't finish. Horror crept through Seren's veins. And you're planning to touch me? Only with your permission, and only as much as necessary. He met her gaze directly. I've learned to control it over the years. Brief contact is safe, but you should know the risk. She should have been terrified, should have been running for the door. Instead, she found herself reaching for his hand. He flinched back. Seren, brief contact, she said. You said it was safe. I said I was in control. That doesn't mean... I trust you. The words hung between them, surprising them both. Slowly, carefully, Kyle allowed her fingers to close around his. The cold was immediate and intense, like plunging her hand into a mountain stream. But beneath the chill, his skin was smooth and soft, his palm calloused from years of sword work. You're warm, he murmured, something raw creeping into his voice. So warm. Is that good or bad? I don't know. His thumb traced across her knuckles, feather-light. I haven't been touched in 5 years. Not like this. Not by choice. Seren's heart clenched. 5 years. 5 years of isolation, of cold, of people flinching away from his touch. What happened to you, Kyle? He stiffened. That's not a conversation for tonight. When then? Perhaps never. He released her hand gently and stood. We should proceed. The sooner we create the evidence the court requires, the sooner you can rest. The distance was back. That cold, careful wall he kept between himself and everything else. Seren felt its return, like a physical loss. What do you need me to do? She asked quietly. Lie down. She obeyed, her heart pounding as she stretched out across the silken sheets. Kyle extinguished most of the candles with a wave of his hand. Magic, she realized, or something like it. Until only one remained, casting the room in dim, flickering light. Then he crossed to the bed and stood over her. I'm going to lie beside you, he said. Nothing more. The proximity will transfer enough scent to satisfy the court's requirements. Seren nodded, not trusting her voice. He lowered himself onto the mattress slowly, maintaining several inches of space between them. Even so, the cold radiated from him like waves, raising goosebumps along her skin. They lay in silence for a long moment. The candle flickered. Somewhere outside, a nightbird called. "This is strange," Seren said finally. "Yes? I mean, I'm lying in bed with the most powerful man in the kingdom, and we're both fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Would you prefer we weren't?" The question, so casual, so unexpected, startled a laugh out of her. Kyle turned his head slightly, and in the dim light she could swear she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. "That wasn't a serious offer," he clarified. "I know. I simply meant, I know what you meant." She was smiling now, despite everything. "You're not as cold as you pretend to be, are you?" Something flickered in his pale gaze. "I'm exactly as cold as I pretend to be. That's the problem." Before she could respond, he reached over and took her hand again. The cold was less shocking this time. Still intense, but bearable. "Your warmth," he said quietly. "It helps. More than the fires, more than the heated stones they put in my bed. I don't understand why. Maybe because I'm not afraid of you. Probably." His voice was quiet, almost wondering. She squeezed his fingers gently. "But I've spent 3 years being afraid. I'm tired of it." They lay together as the candle burned lower, hand in hand, the cold and the warm meeting somewhere in the space between them. It wasn't intimacy, not really, but it was something. Something neither of them had names for yet. Eventually, Kale's breathing slowed. His grip on her hand loosened but didn't release entirely. In sleep, the harsh lines of his face softened, making him look younger, almost vulnerable. Seren watched him for a long time. "What happened to you?" she wondered. "What made you this way? And more importantly, what happens when you find out what I did?" She didn't sleep that night, but for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel alone. When dawn broke through the windows, Kale was gone. The only evidence he'd been there at all was the lingering cold on the sheets and the faint impression of his hand in hers. But on her pillow, she found a single white rose, and beneath it, a note in elegant handwriting. "Thank you for not being afraid." Weeks passed, then months. Seren had expected her life as queen to be lonely, a gilded cage where she'd wander empty halls and count the days until her usefulness expired. She'd prepared herself for isolation, for the cold formality of a contractual marriage. She hadn't prepared for Kale. It started small. A knock at her door in the evenings, always hesitant, always with the same excuse. He needed to discuss some matter of state, or review a treaty, or seek her opinion on a territorial dispute. The first time, Seren had been confused. "You want my opinion? You're clever." He'd said it like fact, not flattery. "And you see things differently than my advisors. They tell me what they think I want to hear. You tell me the truth." So she'd given him her thoughts on the border conflict with Thesmar, and he'd listened with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced. He came back the next night, and the next. Soon, the pretense of state business fell away entirely. He'd arrive after sunset, settle into the chair by her fire, and simply stay. Sometimes they talked for hours about politics, philosophy, childhood memories, dreams they'd abandoned. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, reading or thinking or just existing in the same space. For a man who claimed to want nothing to do with her, Kale seemed incapable of staying away. "You're here again," Seren observed one evening, looking up from her book to find him standing in her doorway. "I can leave." "I didn't say I wanted you to leave." She set the book aside and patted the space beside her on the settee. "Sit. You look exhausted." He hesitated. He always hesitated. Before crossing the room and lowering himself beside her. The cold radiated from him as usual, but Seren had grown accustomed to it, had even grown to find it comforting in a strange way. The council meeting ran long, he admitted. Brennick wants to increase taxes on the eastern provinces. I disagreed. Let me guess. He reminded you that your father would have agreed with him? Kyle's jaw tightened. He invokes my father's memory whenever he wants to win an argument. And does it work? It used to. He turned to look at her, and something in his expression had shifted, softened. Not anymore. Seren's heart stuttered. What changed? You, he said simply. You remind me that my father's way isn't the only way. That tradition can be questioned. That strength doesn't have to mean cruelty. She didn't know what to say, so she reached for his hand instead. The cold was familiar now, almost welcome. And when his fingers closed around hers, warmth spread through her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Stay tonight, she heard herself say. Not for appearances. Just stay. Kyle's eyes searched her face. Whatever he found there made his breath catch. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking you to not be alone for one night. She squeezed his fingers. Neither of us should have to be alone anymore. He stayed, not in the way the court might have imagined. There was no passionate tumbling into silk sheets, no desperate claiming of flesh against flesh. Instead, they lay together in the darkness, his cold seeping into her warmth seeping into his cold. Somewhere in the middle, they found balance. Seren woke at dawn to find his arm draped across her waist, his face peaceful in sleep. The cold had lessened somehow, as if her presence had thawed something deep inside him. I'm falling in love with him, she realized with sudden, terrifying clarity. The thought should have sent her running. Love wasn't part of their arrangement. Love was dangerous, unpredictable, and impossible. But as Kale stirred beside her, as those winter storm eyes blinked open and found hers, as a small, genuine smile curved his lips, Seren knew it was already too late. The nights continued. So did the days. Seren began attending council meetings at Kale's request, offering opinions that increasingly shaped policy. She established a charity for war orphans. She mediated a dispute between two noble houses that had been feuding for generations. The court began to accept her. Some even grew to respect her. Only Lady Meera remained hostile, watching from the shadows with eyes that promised violence. She hates me, Seren told Jorik one afternoon, watching Meera disappear around a corner. And I don't know why. Jorik's expression darkened. Meera was Lyanna's cousin. The name hit Seren like a physical blow. The woman Kale was going to marry? Yes. Meera was convinced she'd be chosen next after Lyanna died. When Kale rejected her along with everyone else, he shook his head. She's never forgiven him. And now that you've succeeded where she failed, she blames me. She blames everyone. But yes, right now, you're her primary target. Jorik gripped her shoulder. Be careful, Seren. Meera's family has connections to dark magic. There are rumors about what really happened to Lyanna. What kind of rumors? But before he could answer, a servant appeared with an urgent summons. The king required the queen's presence immediately. She found Kale in the war room, surrounded by maps and looking more alive than she'd ever seen him. We did it, he said the moment she entered. The Thesmar Treaty. They've agreed to every term. Seren's heart soared. She'd spent weeks helping him craft that agreement, arguing over provisions, suggesting compromises. To know it had succeeded. That's wonderful, she breathed. It's because of you. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. The embrace shocked them both. Kale went rigid as if realizing what he'd done. His cold seeped into her immediately, more intense than usual, as if his emotions had stripped away his careful control. But Seren didn't pull away. Instead, she melted into him, pressing her warmth against his chill, her face against his chest. Seren, he whispered, his voice rough. I shouldn't. I know. The contract said. I know what the contract said. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. His eyes were wild with something she'd never seen before. Fear and longing and a desperate, aching need. I love you, she said. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Kyle stopped breathing. His hands tightened on her arms, not painfully, but with the grip of a drowning man. Don't, he managed. Seren, you can't. I love you, she repeated, fiercer now. I've tried not to. I've tried to keep it contractual, transactional, and safe, but I can't pretend anymore. I love you, Kale. I love the way you listen to me, the way you value my mind, the way you stay every night and hold my hand like I'm the only warm thing in a frozen world. Stop. His voice cracked. Please stop. Why? Because you don't feel the same? Because I do. The confession ripped out of him like a wound tearing open. His forehead fell against hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I love you, he whispered. God's help me. I've loved you since the moment you walked into that hall and looked at me like I was just a man, not a monster. I've loved you through every conversation, every touch, and every night you let me stay. I love you, Seren. I love you more than I've ever loved anything. Joy exploded through her chest, and then Kale screamed. His body convulsed violently. He collapsed to his knees, his hands clutching his chest as if trying to tear something out from inside. Kale! Seren dropped beside him. What's happening? What's wrong? His skin was turning blue. Frost crept across his cheeks, his hands, his throat. His breath came out in visible clouds, and when she touched him, the cold burned like fire. The curse, he gasped. It's activating. I told you, I warned you. What curse? Kale, tell me. His eyes met hers, gray turning to ice. If I love, I die. That's the price. That's always been the price. No. Seren gripped his face, ignoring the freezing pain in her palms. No, I won't accept that. Tell me how to stop it. You can't. He was shaking violently now, convulsions racking his body. No one can. It's been this way for generations. Every king who loves freezes from the inside out. There has to be a way. There isn't. His hand found hers, grip weak and fading. I'm sorry. I tried so hard not to love you. I thought if I couldn't see you, if I kept my distance. But you were so warm. So impossibly warm. Stay with me. Tears streamed down her face. Kale, please. Stay with me. I wish. His eyes fluttered. I wish I'd kissed you. Just once. And then his body went limp in her arms. He's not dead. Not yet. The healer's words were the only thing keeping Seren from shattering completely. Kyle lay in his chambers, his body encased in frost that spread a little further with each passing hour. His heartbeat was faint, barely perceptible. His skin had turned the color of winter sky. How long? Seren demanded. A day. Perhaps two. The healer's voice was grim. The cold is reaching his heart. When it arrives... She didn't need him to finish. Leave us, she commanded. The healer bowed and retreated. The moment the door closed, Seren collapsed beside the bed, her hand finding Kale's frozen fingers. I won't let you die, she whispered. I don't care what curse they put on you. I won't let it win. Bold words! Seren spun. Lady Meera stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Get out, Seren snarled. I think not. Meera stepped inside, closing the door behind her. You wanted to know why I hate you. Now seems like an excellent time to explain. I don't care about your hatred. I care about saving him. Then you should listen carefully. Meera's cold smile widened. Because I know exactly what's killing him. I should... I'm the one who added the final layer to his family's curse. The world tilted. What? Not alone, of course. My grandmother was a shadow witch, quite powerful. When Lyanna died, Meera's expression flickered with something almost like pain. She was my cousin, my best friend, and she died because Kale's bloodline is poison. He didn't kill her. No, the original curse killed her, the one placed on his family centuries ago. Meera circled closer. Any woman who truly loves a king of Valdoria wastes away. Lyanna knew the risk, and she loved him anyway, and it destroyed her. Seren's mind raced. So you... what? Added another layer? I modified the curse. If Lyanna had to die for loving him, then Kale should die for loving anyone else. Fair, don't you think? You're insane. I'm grieving. Meera's composure cracked. And now you've done what I never thought possible. You've made him love again. Which means my curse will finally fulfill its purpose. Seren rose slowly, fury burning through her veins. Tell me how to break it. I can't. Shadow magic binds itself. Once triggered, it cannot be undone. There must be a way. Meera tilted her head, studying Seren with new interest. Perhaps. Shadow is darkness, absence, cold. It can be countered by its opposite, light, presence, warmth. Her eyes narrowed. But not ordinary warmth. It would take fire magic. True fire magic, wielded by someone whose flames burned hot enough to melt shadow itself. Fire magic. The words echoed in Seren's mind, connecting to memories she'd buried for 3 years. The night Calder died. The flames that had erupted from nowhere. The burning in her blood that she'd never been able to explain. The fire wasn't natural, she whispered. What? The night of the fire, when Calder Vasil died. Seren's hands began to tremble. I didn't kill him, but I was there, and I felt it. The flames responding to me, moving with my fear, my rage. Meera's expression shifted from contempt to shock. You're a fire witch? I don't know what I am. Seren looked down at her hands. I've never understood what happened that night. I thought I was a monster, a murderer. If you have fire magic... Meera stepped back, something like fear entering her eyes. True. Unbound fire magic. It could theoretically... Tell me exactly what to do. It won't work. Your power is too raw, too uncontrolled. You'd burn him alive trying to save him. Tell me anyway. Meera stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. You need to find the source of your fire, the moment it first awakened. And you need to understand what really happened. Not the version your father told you, but the truth. She moved toward the door. The answers are in your father's study, a journal he keeps hidden in his desk. I suggest you hurry. Why are you helping me? Meera paused at the threshold. Because I loved Lyanna more than I've ever loved anything, and watching you fight for Kale the way she would have fought. Her voice broke. Maybe I'm tired of the hatred. Maybe I just want it to be over. She disappeared into the corridor. Seren looked at Kale's frozen body, then at the door. The truth, she thought. I have to find the truth. And then she ran. The Thane estate loomed against the evening sky, exactly as Seren remembered it. She'd ridden through the night, pushing her horse to its limits. Jorek had wanted to accompany her, but she'd refused. This confrontation had been 3 years coming. She needed to face it alone. The servants scattered at her approach. The Queen of Valdoria required no announcement, no permission. She swept through the halls of her childhood home like a vengeful ghost. Her father was in his study, as she'd known he would be. Aldrich Thane looked up from his papers, and his face twisted with familiar disgust. You, what are you doing here? The journal. Seren crossed to his desk. The one you keep hidden. I want it. I don't know what you're... Don't. Her voice cracked like a whip. The king is dying. A shadow curse is killing him because he dared to love me, and the only way to save him is to understand what really happened the night Calder died. Aldrich went pale. That has nothing to do with... It has everything to do with it. Seren slammed her palms on the desk. I have fire magic, Father. I've had it my whole life, and you've known. You've known since before that night. Silence stretched between them. Then Aldrich's expression crumpled. Your grandmother, he whispered. She was a fire witch, the most powerful one in 3 generations. I inherited a shadow of her abilities, but you... He shook his head. You got everything. Then why hide it? Why blame me for Calder's death? Because I didn't want anyone to know what our family was. His voice rose. Witches are tolerated, but fire witches? They're feared, hunted. I saw what happened to my mother when she was discovered. They burned her at the stake for the crime of existing. Horror crept through Seren's veins. So you let everyone think I was a murderer? I didn't let them think anything. He stopped. You what? The silence that followed was answer enough. You killed him, Seren breathed. You killed Calder Vasil. He was going to expose you. Aldrich's composure shattered completely. He'd seen you practicing in the gardens, little flames dancing on your fingertips. He was going to tell everyone, and then they'd investigate and they'd discover our bloodline, and... So you murdered him, and you framed your own daughter for the crime. I was protecting the family. You were protecting yourself. Tears burned in her eyes. You destroyed my life. Let me believe I was a monster. Drove Mother away. Your mother left because she couldn't bear to look at you. Because every time she saw you, she saw the witch blood that would doom us all. Seren stepped back, as if struck. The journal, she said coldly. Now. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then, with shaking hands, Aldrich reached into his desk and withdrew a leather-bound book. Everything is there, he whispered. Every secret, every lie, every choice I made to keep this family safe. Seren took it without a word. She was almost to the door when she turned back. The guards will be here within the hour. You'll be arrested for Calder's murder and for conspiracy against the crown. Her voice was steady now, cold as Kale's skin. If you run, I'll find you. If you hide, I'll find you. This ends tonight. She didn't wait for his response. The ride back to Valdoria was a blur. Seren read the journal by moonlight, piecing together the truth of her heritage, her grandmother's power, her father's fear. The fire that had always lived in her blood, suppressed and denied but never extinguished. By the time she reached the castle, she understood. She wasn't a monster. She never had been. She was a fire witch. And fire was exactly what Kale needed. The royal chambers were freezing. Frost covered every surface. The candles had gone out, unable to survive the cold emanating from Kale's body. He lay motionless on the bed, ice crystals forming on his lashes, his lips blue, and his heartbeat nearly silent. Jorek stood by the door, his face streaked with tears. You're too late. The healers say. The healers don't know what I know. Seren crossed to the bed. Everyone out, now. Something in her voice brooked no argument. Jorek and the gathered servants retreated. The door closed. Seren climbed onto the bed, positioning herself above Kale's frozen body. She could feel the curse now. A darkness coiled around his heart, squeezing, consuming. Fire counters shadow, Meera had said. Warmth counters cold. She closed her eyes and reached deep inside herself, past the fear and the doubt and the years of believing she was broken. Down to the core of her being, where something had always burned. Her grandmother's gift, her birthright, her fire. Please, she thought, please work. She pressed her hands to Kale's chest. At first, nothing happened. The cold was so intense it felt like her skin was being stripped away. Pain lanced up her arms and she nearly pulled back. But then she felt it. A spark. Tiny, fragile, but real. She fed it everything she had. Every memory of warmth and love and hope. Every night Kale had stayed with her. Every smile he'd allowed himself. Every whispered confession and gentle touch. The spark became a flame. The flame became an inferno. Fire erupted from her palms, but it didn't burn. It healed. Golden light poured into Kale's body, chasing the darkness, melting the ice, reaching for his frozen heart. And then deeper still, finding the ancient shadow that had plagued his bloodline for centuries, the original curse, the one that had killed Lyanna. Serene's fire consumed it all, burning away every trace of shadow magic until nothing remained but warmth. Seren screamed. The effort was tearing her apart. But she didn't stop. I love you, she thought, pouring herself into the fire. I love you, and I will not let you go. And then, beneath her hands, she felt his heart begin to beat. 1 year later. The gardens of Valdoria had never been more beautiful. Spring flowers bloomed in riotous color, filling the air with sweetness. Sunlight streamed through the ancient trees, dappling the grass with gold. And in the center of it all, surrounded by laughter and love, stood the king and queen. Kale's arm was wrapped around Seren's waist, his skin warm against hers. The curse had shattered completely the night she'd saved him. Not just Meera's addition, but the ancient shadow that had haunted his bloodline for generations. For the first time in centuries, a king of Valdoria could love without death following. And for the first time ever, a woman could love him back without fading away. Future generations would love freely, without fear. You're staring, Seren murmured. I'm admiring. He pressed a kiss to her temple. My wife saved my life with ancient fire magic. I think I'm allowed to stare. That was a year ago. And I'll be staring for the rest of our lives. She laughed, the sound bright and free in a way it had never been before. So much had changed. Her father sat in a prison cell, convicted of murder and treason. Jorik had been named High Counselor, reforming the kingdom's laws with a fairness that would have been impossible under the old regime. Lady Meera had disappeared after that night, leaving behind only a letter of apology and a promise to seek redemption far from Valdoria. And Seren had finally found her place. She was queen, fire witch, wife. And soon. You're thinking about the baby, Kale said. Her hand drifted to her stomach, where new life was just beginning to grow. How can you tell? You get this look. Like you're carrying the sun inside you. Maybe I am. She turned in his arms, facing him fully. Are you afraid? Of fatherhood? He considered. Terrified. But I've discovered that fear is no reason not to love something. Look at you, learning lessons. I had an excellent teacher. He kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Seren rested her forehead against his. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made her heart skip. And thanks to you, I'm finally allowed to say it. They stood together in the gardens as the sun climbed higher, two people who'd entered a contract expecting nothing and found everything. The Alpha King had rejected every woman in the kingdom, until his best friend's sister walked in, and everything changed.